What up, what up, what up? We back on the channel today with another banger. So, this video, we'll be talking about week 4 of college football, my reactions to like all the games, or I guess the most important games. And then I'll also cover conference expansion because, wow, a lot has been going on in conference expansion. So, I will not waste any more of your time. Let's get into it. We'll start off with conference expansion. And man, oh man, was Monday an eventful day. So if you guys don't know, on Monday, essentially what happened was the AAC schools, Memphis, Tulane, UTSA, and USF all said they were staying in the AAC and not moving to the Pac-12. And I kind of predicted this last week. And I'm not going to like toot my own horn, but I just felt like the media rights deal and the TV deal the Pac-12 was offering wasn't substantial enough for those 4 schools to consider paying all that money for travel costs and to move to a conference that's still essentially a Group of 5 conference. I think eventually those schools will get an invite into the AACC or the Big 12, most likely the ACC, because I think Clemson and Florida State will eventually leave that conference, and that will give a couple spots to these Group of 5 teams from the American. I think Memphis and Tulane are the biggest schools in the American, so I think those 2 will go first. And then if there's any extra spots, then I think USF is in a good spot to move to the ACC. I think UTSA is in a little bit of a worse spot, but they'd still be like the 4th option, so they wouldn't be like all the way down the list. So I think it's the right decision in the long run. It is risky because say the ACC doesn't break up or lose a couple of teams, then you're looking at a situation where these 4 are just locked into the American for a long time. It's just I don't think that's likely. I think it's more likely that the ACC calls them in and tries to get them into their conference. But again, they'll just have to wait and see. Again, we'll have to wait and see too. But so the American schools said no to the Pac-12, and that was a massive blow already. Then the Mountain West schools said no to the Pac-12, specifically San Jose State, UNLV, and Air Force said they're going to be committed to the Mountain West. But then a couple hours later, Utah State decides to bolt and leave the Mountain West for the Pac-12. And as a result, UNLV is looking at its options. So, yeah, it's a big day. And also, that's not even to mention the fact that the Pac-12 was in talks with UConn to be a football-only member and Gonzaga as a basketball-only member. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. And I guess I'll first start off with what the Pac-12 did. Essentially, all they did was they added Utah State. And that's all that's happened, as of now, at least. And I think it's a solid add. They've been a solid football program over the past decade. They've made it to a lot of bowl games. They even won a conference championship a couple of years ago. It's definitely a solid add. It's Utah State, you know what I mean? It's not like it's a UNLV or an Air Force. So it definitely wasn't their first pick, but I'm sure the Pac-12 will happily take them in as a way to reach the minimum number of schools you need to stay in FBS conference. Because now all they need is one more team, and yeah, so like it should be very doable. But the thing is, Utah State is a mid-major basketball powerhouse. They've made it to so many NCAA tournaments in the past couple of years. They've been one of the best teams in the Mountain West in terms of basketball. They won a couple of conference championships, so it's a great add in terms of basketball. It's just the football is just it's been solid over the past decade. It's just they've been pretty bad like kind of recently. So I don't know. I think it'll be good in the long run for them that they obviously have another school so they can reach the minimum number of schools. But it's just I expected them to for sure add UNLV. But on to UNLV. I thought the door was closed on them joining the Pac-12 until Utah State decided to leave. And because of that, UNLV decided to explore its options again. And as a result, I think what happens is UNLV is going to go back and decide that they want to go to the Pac-12. Because essentially what happened was UNLV and Air Force decided to stay with the Mountain West under the terms that all 8 teams that were still in the Mountain West, including Utah State, would stay with the conference. But Utah State left, so now I think what happens is UNLV and Air Force explore their options again. And as a result, I think eventually UNLV will decide to leave. It's just the Pac-12 has a better TV deal. It's going to give you greater exposure for the college football playoff. And just all the opportunities are there in the Pac-12, I feel like. So I think UNLV eventually decides to leave. But because of that, the Mountain West would be down to like 7 teams, I think, if UNLV leaves. And if Air Force leaves, then that'll be down to 6 teams. So the Mountain West is in a very, very bad position. Actually, no, sorry. They're already down to 7 teams because Utah State left. But they'd be down to 6 teams if UNLV left. So minor clarification. But either way, they're in a bad position. In terms of the Pac-12, who else they could add? I feel like they'll probably add Gonzaga eventually. I feel like it's too lucrative for Gonzaga to not consider it. They've been dominating the West Coast Conference for way too long in basketball. They might end up adding a St. Mary's as well. I'm not 100% sold on it, but I feel like Gonzaga might not want to go like on its own to the Pac-12 as a basketball-only member, so they might bring in St. Mary's, who is like the only other like elite basketball program in that conference. Like obviously you have like Santa Clara, who's good sometimes. San Francisco's been good recently, but I feel like those two are like the powerhouses of the WCC. So I feel like it's very plausible and possible that those two end up in the Pac-12 as basketball-only members. UConn again is an option, but I just don't. Warriors like the interest in UConn football, it's just not there right now, and I feel like the Pac-12 wouldn't really be getting anything out of adding UConn other than just like an additional member. There's also obviously the FCS powers like North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State. I just don't think they're going to join the Pac-12. It is also a lot harder for FCS teams to move up now because they have to pay a $5 million fee to the NCAA when it used to be like something as small as I think like 500,000. So comparatively, like it's a lot larger. Might have been even smaller than that. Don't quote me on that, but they've definitely like made it harder for teams to move up because of the fact that so many teams moved up from the FCS to the FBS. But those schools could still do it. It's just I don't think they'll do it with the Pac-12. Then you can go on to like Sun Belt teams potentially, like maybe like a Texas State. And I know like the Pac-12 wants to get into Texas. It's just I'm not sure if those teams will be lucrative enough to for like the Pac-12 to consider adding them. So I feel like what ends up happening is they just add Utah. They've already added Utah State. I think they add UNLV, stay at 8 for a little bit, try and snag Air Force as well. I don't think that's what happens, but they'll try to. Then they'll add up like Gonzaga and maybe like a St. Mary's on the basketball side. And I think Air Force decides to go to the AAC. And I know they like said we'll be committed to the Mountain West, but again, that was contingent on all 8 teams staying. And now that Utah State left, and if UNLV leaves too, I think Air Force is just gonna bolt too and join the other service academies in the American. It just makes way too much sense. You can essentially have all 3 service academies in one conference, which would be a major like pull for the American, and also like a much better TV deal, especially now considering the Mountain West lost 5 of its best teams, and it would be 6 if UNLV leaves. So I just think it's lining up for Air Force to join the American. Now that brings us to not the American, but the Mountain West. What does the Mountain West do? The Mountain West might dissolve in a situation like this where UNLV and Air Force both leave because they'd be only down to 5 teams. None of the other teams in the conference are really that lucrative. Like San Jose State is probably the best of the rest. They're in a good location. They've had a solid football program for a while. But even then, like they're not insanely lucrative that another conference has to add them. So I don't know. The Mountain West could fold, but I also think the Mountain West could try and just add UTEP and New Mexico State, who've been in talks with the Mountain West for the longest time to join the conference. They might also add like FCS schools again. I think it's a lot more likely that FCS schools go to the Mountain West than the Pac 12 because I think it just makes it easier considering the lack of teams in the Mountain West now. So I definitely think the FCS schools are in play. Texas State could potentially go to the Mountain West. I don't think they will because of how essentially how volatile they are right now, the Mountain West. So I think Texas State would rather stay in like a stable conference like the Sun Belt, or at least a more stable conference. But they're definitely an option. So I don't know. The Mountain West has a lot of thinking to do, but I think they have to act quickly to make sure that they don't dissolve. And as a result, I think they'll go after like the FCS schools. But so yeah, to kind of recap, it's a massive win for the American. They end up keeping their biggest schools. They also might be in play for Air Force again, so massive win for them. And it's a somewhat kind of a win for the Pac 12, because they couldn't get their biggest targets in the American schools, but they could still got another school in Utah State, and they might still get UNLV. So if they get those two schools, I'd say it's good enough and close enough to a win. For the Mountain West, it's a massive blow because you lose another school in Utah State, and everything hinges now on UNLV and Air Force. If you lose both of them, this is a disaster for the Mountain West, and you would need to recoup with probably FCS schools. And it's just not looking good for Mountain West. But so what I think happens is the Mountain West then picks up FCS schools to shore up their conference. They add UTEP and New Mexico State, and they get back to I would say probably around like 10 teams, maybe 12, but probably like 10 teams. The Pac-12 finally adds UNLV, and they kind of just wait, I think, until like maybe the American teams decide to come back, or maybe the ACC school decides to, or not decides, but the ACC potentially implodes, and those schools can like go to the Pac-12. I doubt it, but it's a possibility. And the American, I think, picks up Air Force. So on to the games. Thursday slate, we had one game, App State versus South Alabama. South Alabama murdered App State. So maybe South Alabama is a better team than we expected because they lost a couple early games, but now they won 2 straight. Their offense has looked electric. And maybe App State is not as good as we thought they were. So I feel like that's my big takeaway from Thursday's game. South Alabama could contend in the Sun Belt for like a conference championship appearance. We don't know, so we'll see. But yeah, and then on to Friday's games. There was 3 big games I like to highlight, and there's only like 3 games on Friday. But Illinois beating another ranked team in Nebraska on the road was a massive win for them. Illinois has been a good team so far, and they continue looking like a good team. The defense is really damn good. The offense has done well enough to win, and it's very possible that Illinois is a sneaky Big Ten contender. I wouldn't say that they're going to make the conference championship, but this team could be reminiscent of the team from a couple of years ago and win, like, I don't know, like 7, 8 games. And I think that'll be a success for the team. So Illinois looks like a good team. Nebraska, this is a very disappointing loss. The offensive line just decided to give up in overtime. And they got absolutely pummeled, and Raiola got pummeled. So it's definitely not a bad loss, but it's just a tough loss to take. Considering you were ranked, just came off of beating Colorado, and you had high hopes, and this just happens. But I think they can still bounce back. You have a lot of games in the season left. They still have a really good defense. I think Nebraska is eventually going to come to their own. I think they'll end up back ranked in the polls. I think they bounce back, but it's a disappointing loss for them for sure. Then we get on to the Stanford game. And Stanford might actually be a decent football team this year. Never thought I'd say that. Because they've been on a rough couple of years ever since they fired David Shaw. And even with him, they had a couple of pretty bad years after CMC left. So the team wasn't looking that good, but they have a really star wide receiver. They have a decent offense, so the team could be looking decent in the Pac, or not the Pac-12, sorry, the ACC. That still sounds so weird to say, but they might be a good team in the ACC. Now Syracuse, Cal McCord had a really up and down day. Like he threw a couple of touchdowns, threw a couple of picks. He was just up and down, so they'll definitely need him to be a lot more consistent and better for Syracuse to like contend in the ACC. But he wasn't that in that game. Then we get on to San Jose State and Washington State. This was probably the most exciting and most chaotic game of the weekend. It was such a great game. I don't know if you guys were able to stay up late and watch it, but I did, and it was fantastic. It was such an explosive game. Both offenses were amazing. Both defenses came up with clutch stops when they needed to. And it was just a wacky game all around that went into overtime. But eventually, Washington State outlasted San Jose State. And I think it should have happened last week, but it should definitely happen this week. It still hasn't for some reason, but Washington State should be ranked. Hopefully by next week, after they beat Boise State. At least that's my prediction. I think they'll be ranked, but they should be ranked this week. Anyways, on to the Saturday games. We had a lot of them because it's Saturday, but Texas, the number one team in the country. Arch Manning throws an interception on the first drive. And then it flashes a lot of potential the rest of the game. So Texas, of course, was going to blow out ULM. Like, it was not going to be close. But Arch Manning, again, showed a lot of promise, showed a lot of flashes, and Texas fans have a lot to be excited for the next couple of years. Even after Quinn Ewers probably, most likely, leaves this year for the draft, Arch looks good. Ohio State, they look great. They beat up on a bad team. Ole Miss, same thing. They look great. The offense looks great. But again, they beat up on a bad team. Tennessee. This is where College Game Day was at for Tennessee, Oklahoma. I said this last week after Oklahoma almost lost to Tulane at home, that Oklahoma is not as good as their ranking says they are. And I was proven right because, again, this is going to be a down year for Oklahoma. It's not going to be like a, I don't know, at least probably not going to be like a 4-8 year or something, but I think they'll make a bowl game, but I don't think it's going to be much more than that. Jackson Arnold is really like struggling in terms of being able to be a great quarterback. And obviously, like, to go from Dylan Gabriel to like Jackson Arnold is a pretty big downgrade, at least as of now. He still has a lot of potential, but as of now, it's kind of a big downgrade. Oklahoma's defense has still looked pretty good. It's just the offense has completely struggled, so they might be cooked. Tennessee, though, is a championship contender. They showed that. Nico looked good enough. The defense was shut down. Tennessee looks great. On to Mizzou. They looked very, very shaky against a bad Vanderbilt team. I know Vanderbilt's, at least before the game, was 2-1, but they came off a pretty bad loss. And again, it's Vanderbilt, right? Mizzou was at home, the number 7 ranked team in the country, and they just completely flat out walked through the game. They just didn't even try. That's what it looked like. Brady Cook had a pretty bad game, despite what the counting stats say. He was missing a lot of open throws. They were not feeding the wide receivers and the stars and like Luther Burden, Theo Weiss that much. Should have been feeding them more. The run game was great, but for some reason we decided not to continue with it. So yeah, I don't know. I say we, even though I'm not really like a Mizzou fan. It's just that they're a team that I root for. So, but yeah, Mizzou not look good. It's not a good sign of things to come. They need to adjust a lot in order to be a lot better. But yeah, that's not a good performance against Vandy. Barely beating a Vanderbilt team at home. Not a good performance. Miami, on the other hand, it was a close game for a while. USF is a really good team. So I'll give Miami credit for pulling away and eventually blowing them out. USF, again, they're a really good Group of 5 team. And I expect big things from them this year and for the next couple of years. Penn State, again, another easy win. Nothing more to add. They played a pretty bad Kent State team, and they won easily. Good for them. Michigan, massive win. That game looked very, very concerning in that fourth quarter because USC was scoring. Michigan's offense wasn't doing anything. We punted the ball back to USC, and it looked like USC could end the game. But thankfully they didn't because Clell Mullings came up big on that last drive and ended up scoring the game-winning touchdown. But in terms of the first half, like Michigan physically dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides. So that was really good to see. We definitely do need Alex Orji to make plays at the quarterback position, though, because he only threw the ball very few times. He only completed like 32 yards, I think. It just wasn't a good passing game. It was just run the rock, ground and pound. And it worked for us, but it was very close to not working for us as well. So I feel like we definitely need Alex Orji to be able to throw the ball for us to reach our ceiling. And I don't think this team's going to be elite. This team's not going to be like anything amazing. It's just I think it should be good enough to make the college football playoff. But for us to reach that ceiling, we need Orji to play like a quarterback. But yeah, otherwise, big win. Our season's not off the rails just yet. Utah, another big win. They beat another Big 12 contender at Oklahoma State. Utah looks really good. They look like college football playoff contenders. And I'd say they're the Big 12 favorites right now, especially after the K-State loss. Oklahoma State definitely needs to bounce back, and they can bounce back. They have a good team. It's not a terrible loss because it's a good Utah team. I still think Utah needs Cam Rising to come back to make like a run in the CFP, but I think they'll be fine for now. That defense is really damn good. And then BYU. Speaking of Kansas State, BYU smoked Kansas State at home. And this was genuinely shocking because K-State looked so good last week against a good Arizona team. And then they come here, go to Provo in a night game, and just drop a big stinker. I don't know. It was shocking, but good for BYU. They might be a sneaky Big 12 contender. And K-State maybe isn't as good as we thought. But it also might be a case of them just overlooking BYU, which is what I think is more likely the case because I really hope they didn't just beat up on Arizona and just kind of just sell for the rest of the year. But we'll see. Now we get on to LSU. And LSU also did not look good for the majority of that game. The offense looked good enough for sure. Nussmeier is a great quarterback. But again, the defense was allowing UCLA to stay in that game. And remember, this is a bad UCLA team. This UCLA team almost lost. They got destroyed by Indiana. So this UCLA team is not good. So LSU definitely needs their defense to step up in SEC play if they want to like compete for anything. But again, not a good sign for LSU. On to Notre Dame. The Kings of the bounce back again. They bounced back again from that terrible loss to NIU at home. That looks even worse this week considering NIU lost. But yeah, one thing you can say about Marcus Freeman is that after a bad loss, he'll have that team up and running and playing well for the rest of the year. So that happened again. Now on to Louisville, who plays Notre Dame this week. Louisville looked great. They beat a really good Georgia Tech team by double digits. I thought Georgia Tech was going to win the game because they, for some reason, always play really well against ranked teams. And they did play well. It's just Louisville played a lot better. So I'm excited for that matchup between Louisville and Notre Dame. Should be a good one. And Louisville, again, are one of the few contenders of the ACC. Now, Iowa State, a great offensive showing against a bad team, but good win for them. Quality win. Clemson, that was a big win. NC State is definitely not the team we thought they were. They had high hopes in the preseason. Some predicted them to win the ACC. They're definitely not that team. But still, a very dominant win from Clemson. So maybe Clemson has figured it out. I wouldn't say that for sure, but they could be legit again, perchance. But on to NIU. Again, a bad loss. They couldn't handle their ranking, and as a result, they lost to Buffalo. And Buffalo's not a bad team. It's just you just can't lose that game, you know. And they could still make the college football playoff if they win out. It's just I don't think that's going to happen. So yeah, tough loss, but great upset again of Notre Dame. Now on to Texas A&M, who for some reason is still ranked. This was way too close of a game against Bowling Green. And I will say Marcel Reed did look good and looked better than Wigman, but still way too close of a game. And Bowling Green, they're a sneaky good MAC team. They could make a run the MAC. They played Penn State and now Texas A&M close, so they're good. Now on to some other teams that are surprisingly undefeated. Indiana, undefeated. They look good. They could very well reach a bowl game. Rutgers, same thing. They look good. A bowl game was within reach. JMU, another one. They look amazing. They just absolutely destroyed North Carolina on the road. That's a Power 4 team and a really good ACC team. So JMU could be a very, very good Group of 5 team this year. Now on to some disappointing teams like Kansas, really disappointing. Falling to 1-3. The offense just isn't there for some reason. I don't know why, but Jalen Daniels just doesn't look as good as he did a couple years ago. And yeah, they lost their offensive coordinator, but I really thought this team could have been a sneaky contender in the Big 12, but clearly seems like they aren't. Good win for West Virginia, though. And kind of correlating to West Virginia, Pitt is undefeated, who beat West Virginia last week. And they have a really good quarterback in Eli Holstein, so again, they might be a sneaky contender in the ACC. Duke's undefeated too. And again, they haven't really played like any good competition yet, but they're still undefeated. So I think they could very well reach a bowl game, and it's very well within their reach. And the last game I'd like to highlight is Boston College, Michigan State. And yeah, Boston College again. I said it last week. I'll say it again. They are one of the most underrated teams in the country. And I know they were ranked last week, but they're still underrated. I think they definitely have an elite quarterback, not an elite quarterback, a great quarterback in Castellanos. I won't say he's elite just yet. He needs to take the next step as a passer, but he's still a very good quarterback. The defense looks great. Their offensive line and defensive line is really physical. So overall, really good team for them, and I think they're going to have a great season. That's all we have for today. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree with my takes? What do you think about realignment? Whatever it is, just let me know down below. And until next time.